watch your sign. So shit, it only matters.
You're looking right through me like I'm not here.
Judging from their name, Suicidal Tendencies were never afraid of a little controversy. Formed in Venice, California during the early 80s, from the beginning the group's leader was outspoken vocalist Mike Muir. The outfit specialized in vicious hardcore early on, building a huge following among skateboarders and thus lending a major hand in the creation of skatepunk, before eventually turning their focus to thrash metal. Early on, the group found it increasingly difficult to book shows due to rumors of its members' affiliation with local gangs and consistent violence at their performances. The underground buzz regarding Suicidal grew too loud for labels to ignore, as the quartet signed on with the indie label Frontier, issuing Muir and Company's classic self-titled debut in 1983. The album quickly became the best-selling hardcore album up to that point. Its best-known track, Institutionalized, was one of the first hardcore punk videos to receive substantial airplay on MTV, and was eventually used in the cult classic, Emilio Estevez movie Repo Man, as well as in an episode for the hit TV show Miami Vice. Our Top 10 Suicidal Tendencies Songs looks at an American thrash band formed in the early 1980s. The band has formed a considerable following over time. Our Top 10 Suicidal Tendencies Songs list takes a look at some of the best material the band has released over the years. War Inside My Head. We open our Top 10 Suicidal Tendencies Songs list with a track from the band's second album, Join the Army. The album was long awaited, not coming out until 4 years after their debut, and is considered one of the most crucial albums to combine thrash and punk. The record is one of the band's most celebrated, and it reached number 100 on the Billboard 200. It was their first album to feature Rocky George on guitar and R.J. Herrera on drums, as well as their last with Lauchi Mayorga on bass, who did, however, co-write some songs on their next album. This was also their last LP where they played hardcore punk, as they adapted a more metal style on the next release, which they have continued with ever since. Get Whacked. This next track is taken from the group's fifth album, Lights Camera Revolution, which was released in 1990. It was the final album to feature what is considered the band's strongest lineup. Drummer R.J. Herrera would leave before the recording of the band's next album. The record saw the band veering even further away from their punk roots and becoming more refined as a pure thrash metal band, although it could be argued that this had been the case for some time. They had now begun to employ more complex song structures, and the lyrics were written in a more verbally diverse way as opposed to the very to-the-point chants of the earlier material. This album also notably introduced more elements of funk metal, which was likely due to the addition of Rob Trujillo on bass. Nobody Hears. Up next is this track from the band's sixth album, The Art of Rebellion. It was the album's first single and became their biggest hit at the time in the US, reaching number 28 in the Billboard chart. After the departure of Herrera, the band recorded the record with renowned session drummer Josh Freese, known for his work with 9 Inch Nails and A Perfect Circle amongst many others. To this date, it is their most commercially successful album, with this track and I'll Hate You Better being the only top 40 hits that they have ever had. Many fans often describe it as ST's experimental album. Guitarist Mike Clark acknowledged this, but also stated that this was not the intention and that the album's sound was just a natural progression. The funk elements that had been introduced were continued and expanded on this record. Psycho Vision. This track is from 1999's Freedom, which was Suicidal Tendencies' first album after they reformed. This track harks back to their hardcore days, featuring none of the thrash funk that had become a key aspect of their sound over the past few years. It was featured on the video game Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. Trip at the Brain. This song is from the third album, How Will I Laugh Tomorrow When I Can't Even Smile Today, released in 1988, and was also its first single. The album was their major label debut on Epic Records. It was also Mike Clark's first recording with the band and the only one with bassist Bob Hefkin, who would be replaced by Trujillo on the next album. The record further continued the band's progression from a punk band to metal, with the band learning more complex playing styles leading to longer songs. It also had a better production which enabled the new sound to develop well. It was moderately successful, reaching 111 in the Billboard charts. I Saw Your Mommy. With this next entry we go all the way back to the first album, their self-titled debut from 1983. Despite being a lot less commercially accessible than much of their later material, it sold very well, which was no doubt a factor in the band's future success. It received a positive critical reception and has gone on to sell well in consecutive years. It was re-recorded 10 years later as Still Psycho after all these years. Send Me Your Money. This track is yet another single from Light's Camera Revolution. It also had a video which received heavy airplay on MTV, notably being featured on Beavis and Butthead. It was their only ever single to chart in the UK. Despite not being released until 1990, the song was written several years earlier, being a regular staple of their setlist as far back as 1985. The track begins with a drum intro and is then followed by one of Trujillo's funky bass lines. The riff is reused from You'll Be Sorry from the first album. The lyrics are about crooked preachers taking money from gullible followers. Trujillo performs two impressive bass solos during the song. How Will I Laugh Tomorrow? This partial title track from the third album was its second single, which also had a promo video. It is definitely one of the highlights of the album, featuring some rather deep lyrics dealing with depression. The track generally shows the band's ability to successfully write a slow ballad without it sounding clunky. There is an acoustic remix which suits the tone and lyrical content of the track even better. You Can't Bring Me Down. At the number 2 spot on our top 10 Suicidal Tendencies Songs list is one of the band's best-known songs from Lights. It was a successful single despite failing to chart. The song takes time to build up. It begins with a whammy bar solo followed by an acoustic part over which a solo is played. After a while it speeds up and then kicks in properly. Muir's lyrics deal with the general stress that comes from dealing with people who have always tried to put him down. He puts in a very angry performance but also adds a humorous touch. It was written by Muir and Rocky George. The video was a favorite on MTV's Headbangers Ball. It had its own story to tell, taking the opportunity to take a stab at censorship groups such as the PMRC and places in Los Angeles that banned them from playing. Institutionalized. At the top of our Suicidal Tendencies Songs list is this single from the first album, which has always been a favorite with fans, and a staple of the band's live shows. It was the album's only single and it played a vital part in terms of the band achieving mainstream success. It was re-recorded 10 years later and featured on Still Psycho after all these years. That version was nominated for the Best Metal Performance at that year's Grammys but lost to Ozzy Osbourne's I Don't Want to Change the World. The track is also known for its video, which sees Muir walking through various locations whilst ranting the lyrics about being institutionalized by school, the church and his own parents. His father in the video is played by Jack Nance of Eraserhead fame.
Okay, I'm just thinking. He goes, no, you're not thinking, you're on drugs. No, people